What's up guys and welcome back to MoAn. If you guys are new here, then what is up? My name is Erica. Heya, how you doing? And if you're into the history of the ancient Greeks and the Romans, maybe you're just into the mythology, and maybe one of your friends just said that I could help you pass a class, which like lots of people have been saying recently. It kind of gives me a little bit of anxiety that people are using this for school, but also like, great, we're all learning. So if that sounds like you, even if that doesn't sound like you should still be hitting that subscribe button and the bell icon so you know every single time I post in the future. It also helps me get paid, so like I would appreciate it. But anyways, as you can see there from the title of today's video, we're going to be continuing our Iliad series here on the channel, and we are currently on book 4 of Homer's famous poem. So book 4, what you need to bear in mind before we start book 4 is that last week, yes, last week, I was going to say yesterday, but yes, it was last week, that I left you on book 3 where Menelaus and Paris had this duel. They had agreed that whoever win the duel, the war is over, that person won, that side won, and then they could go home. And it leaves with Menelaus winning by forfeit because Paris is taken off of the battlefield. So that's where we're left, okay? So we know that Menelaus, according to all the men, not the gods, that's key, according to all of the men, that Menelaus has won, and so the Trojan War should technically be over. But for book 4, let's just slide into the action of book 4, because I feel like that's kind of important. So if I could summarize book 4 into one sentence, it would be that Zeus forces the Trojans to break the truce because Hera told him to. Ta-da! His wife literally tells him to do something, and he just goes, okay, and does it. We're going to get into detail about why, because there's a little bit more to it than that. But the book opens with all the Olympians on Olympus, as you would expect them to be. They're all on Olympus, and they're having like basically like a cocktail party as they're watching the duel that I told you about in book 3. So they're watching that happen, they're watching Menelaus, they're watching Paris, and Zeus decides to basically ruin the entire moment where he's like, hey guys, now that we're looking down at these battles, we're looking down at these men, why don't we weigh up like who's who and who's more likely to win? So he says that Menelaus has the aid of Hera and Athena on his side, and then we have Paris, who only has the aid of Aphrodite. So he says, you know, the whole war, not only the battle, is basically weighted towards Menelaus, is weighted towards Greece. We now have the choice of, do we want to get involved to help the Trojans a little bit more, make it a little bit more even, or do we just want to let Menelaus like have his glory days, basically, is what he says. From behind him, though, we've got his wife and his daughter, who is sitting there apparently plotting evil things about the Trojans. Obviously, they hear this, and Athena just immediately starts sulking. She's just like, why is my dad getting involved? Like, I don't want him to do that. Whereas Hera reacts in the exact way that we think she will, and she stands up and she yells at Zeus. She yells at him, and she's like, what the hell do you think you're even trying to insinuate? If you're gonna help the Trojans over the Greeks, no one's gonna go for that. We're here to see the Greeks win. That is what we came for. That was a prophecy. We want to see this. No one's going to stand on your side. But bear in mind that Hera's literally there to watch the Trojans burn. Like, she doesn't give a shit about any of them, but most importantly, not the Trojans. So anytime that people are going to start like interfering for the Trojans, Hera's like not happy about it. So Zeus naturally retorts, he can never let anything go. So he turns around to Hera and he says, what the have the Trojans ever done to you? He highlights also why he loves the Trojans. We haven't got that up until this point, where he says that Priam, the king, but also the rest of the Trojans, they never let any of his temples go without any offerings. There's always prayers to him. So he really likes them. He's like, they're amazing. They love me, and therefore I like them. And in the same vein, in the same sentence, he literally equates Hera then to his father, and thus her father, Kronos, by saying, I feel like the only way you're going to get over this anger towards Priam is if you swallow him and all of his children, which is dark. I know a lot of you are not mythology buffs who watch this channel, and that's totally fine. You gotta trust me, that's really dark to say, because Kronos had swallowed Kronos, who is Zeus's father, and thus Hera's father, because they're siblings. If you didn't know that, yeah, they're siblings, haha, fun. So their father swallowed Hera and all of her siblings minus Zeus. Zeus was saved, but literally swallowed Hera. So he's bringing up this traumatic thing that happened to her and saying, you're just like our dad. He then sort of finishes it by saying, look, I'm going to be on your side because you are my wife, and I've already told you multiple times, even in this text that we get, right? He said it multiple times. He's like, I've already told you that I'm going to be on your side, so don't even worry about that. However, if in the future there's a battle between a city that you love and some other city, I'm going to make sure that that city is destroyed, just so that you know. It's going both ways. If you're making me do this to the Trojans, I'm going to make you do this in the future. And Hera, you know what? You don't give her props where props is due. She turns around, she goes, fine, the cities that I love are Sparta, Mycenae, and Argus, that's it. She says, I love these 3 cities, so if we enter battle with any of those, then you can trash those, I don't really give a shit. And you're like, I mean, it's not the best way of handling this, but also, it's the best way that Hera could have handled this. She does clarify this though, even though we start thinking like, oh, maybe she has like a healthy response to something, even though she's just offered up all these mortals on a platter. Minus that, she does say to Zeus that the reason why she's offered all that information up though right off the bat is that she says, even if I was going to try and fight you, it wouldn't work. Like, you're much stronger than me, even though that she is the eldest daughter of Kronos and Rhea, who's her mother. Even though she's the eldest, she's not the most powerful. He is. He's the king of the gods. So she's like, at the end of the day, whatever you say goes. And if you're gonna do this for me, then whatever, I'm fine with it. But in order to prove himself, she does ask Zeus to directly tell Athena to go down to the battlefield to help the Greeks. And she says, that's the way that you can prove that you really are on my side. And so then Zeus says to Athena, hey, go down and help the Greeks fight. And Athena's like, peace, I'm leaving. So Athena then races down to the battlefield. She's like, I'm ready. And she goes down to the Trojan side to go and encourage them to break the truce that they had just made with the Greeks. Because she needs somebody to attack the Greeks before the Greeks are going to start attacking the Trojans again, right? So she ends up taking on the disguise of Antenor's son, who goes by Laodocus, yes, that's his name. And in this form, she goes to find this guy called Pandarus. Now, Pandarus is known on the Trojan side for being an incredible archer. Like, that is literally his claim to fame. He has a little bow and arrow. That's what he does best. In fact, Homer does give us this whole background to the bow, which is why, by the way, if anytime in this like casual chat I say goat killer, I mean Pandarus. I will also be making notes, obviously at the bottom of the screen, to highlight that to you guys. But the reason being is because when Homer goes into the history of this whole bow that he has, it's made up of parts of goat that he had killed. Like, the horns and everything was made into this bow. And so the first time I read it, I just labeled him as goat killer, and now Pandarus is always goat killer to me. But Athena finds this guy and she tells him like, hey, you've got to make like all these prayers to Apollo because, you know, you're an archer and it's the archer god. So make all these prayers and you should be hitting Menelaus. Like, you should be shooting him. And it really doesn't take that much convincing. Pandarus is just like, okay. And he picks up the bow and fires it at Menelaus. Like, literally just, it's that easy. Now, unfortunately for Athena, he's actually really good at his job. Not that we're surprised, because Homer literally told us, the reader, he's the best archer. Clearly, Athena didn't get the memo though. And so when he fires his arrow, it's going like straight for Menelaus. And Athena's like, okay. So she ends up like swatting the arrow away, so it hits Menelaus in like the top of his leg. So it goes down and hits him in the top of his leg. It goes through his armor into his leg. But it doesn't kill him, and that's really, really vital because Agamemnon sees him go to the ground, his brother, and Agamemnon is like, whoa, what the hell? And goes down to see if Menelaus is okay, and he yells up at the Trojans, we had an oath! What the hell are you doing? Which Menelaus from the ground is a bit like, simmer, I'm not dead, it's totally fine. And Agamemnon's like, well, let's call the doctor and let him be the judge of that. And so they have Talthybius, who is his little minion, like Agamemnon's little minion that I mentioned from book 1. So Talthybius then has to go and get MoAn, and MoAn then shows up and he treats Menelaus by doing like a whole, he like sucks his wound. I'm laughing because it's like, it's literally just like a sentence in the book. Like, it's clearly that's normal practice, right? But it just sounds really weird because I said that it was at the top of his thigh and MoAn just shows up and he's like, I have to set this wound. And it's just like, okay. MoAn does pop up later, so he is a name that you guys should be writing down if you're making notes for class. Only because MoAn is the son of this god called Asclepius. That was a sentence. But he's the son of Asclepius, and so who is the healer god, and so he is now like the healer, like first aid man of the Greeks. So he does pop up later in the book where constantly they're like in battle and someone will be like, where's MoAn? Someone has to go and protect MoAn. So he does. He is important later on. Anywho, back to the action. Agamemnon is super duper pissed, right? Because the truce is now broken. So now they're back in battle. And Agamemnon wants to ride off and fight all the Trojans for stabbing his brother. He's like, that's absolutely unacceptable. This man literally won against Paris. The whole thing was that only they were going to fight. Now idiot goat killer comes out of nowhere and stabs him. Not on my watch. So Agamemnon is pretty mad. And he wants to go and rile up all the Greeks to get them excited to go into battle. So basically, he's made a choice to go and make all of them really annoyed. Like really angry. He's going on a mission to make sure they're pissed as so that they want to kill the most Trojans, which is a choice, okay? Like, I mean, I get it that you want people to be angry. As someone who used to do like boxing, I get that. But at the same time, it's like, Agamemnon, that's your army. Like, chill a little. We saw how this went with Achilles. So Agamemnon starts his little walk around the Greek camp. And this is where we meet a number of the heroes that we're all familiar with, right? Because Agamemnon has to go and make them mad. So the first people that he stops off at actually are the Cretans. So I mentioned Idomeneus last time. I think I mentioned Diomedes, where I was like, he's great. So he's the first person that Agamemnon then comes across. And actually Agamemnon doesn't try and get him mad because all of the Cretans are like appropriately getting ready for battle. And so he's like, actually, you're doing a great job. And he says the same to Meriones. So basically all the heroes come in twos, as I've said before. And Idomeneus's double, his second in command, is Meriones. So they are always mentioned together. So they're together. He's basically, Agamemnon tells them both that they're doing a great job. And so he's like, just keep doing what you're doing. And then he keeps on moving. Stop number 2 is for Ajax. So he goes to see big Ajax. There are 2 Ajaxes actually. They are not the same person. There are 2. He's also like big Ajax first. Again, they're doing everything fine. So Agamemnon's like, cool, you're all getting ready. I'm going to keep walking. Stop number 3 is Nestor. Naturally, he's really nice to Nestor because he's always really nice to Nestor. And Nestor has to mention how old he is. Again, he constantly does this. And so Agamemnon's just like, okay, well, thank you so much for getting ready for battle. I'm just gonna leave. I'm just gonna keep walking. You rest, you chill. Now, the 4th hero that he comes across is Odysseus. And this one is really weird because he stops by Odysseus and Homer describes all of Odysseus's men, the Ithacans, can you say the people from Ithaca, as apparently acting as if someone else is going to attack the Trojans. Like, they're all just straight up chilling in their camp. They're just having a good time. They're hanging out. So Agamemnon shows up and he's like, what the f***, guys? And in fact, what he says to Odysseus, it's kind of rude, but it's also like, he says that Odysseus is always the first person to eat at the feast that they have to make before war. So when they make a sacrifice, apparently Odysseus is the first one with his plate being like, I'm hungry. But then he's always the last one to go into battle. So he says all this stuff, which is quite rude, honestly, to Odysseus. And Odysseus is standing there. And when Agamemnon finishes, he lets him finish. And then he just goes, that's a load of bollocks. He's like, I've never done that once. Agamemnon then laughs in the way that I'm laughing, literally. And then just goes, yeah, I know you have a really great heart. Just get everybody ready and it will be fine. And you're like, what a weird scene. Like, what a weird little moment that these heroes had together where he said some to try and get him mad. Odysseus knows it's a lie, so he doesn't get mad, and then Agamemnon laughs, and then he walks away, like clapping him on the back, being like, solid, mate, I'm gonna go over here now. Like, what? And even though that was kind of rude, we then gear up for like the rudest one that he does, because the next person that he goes to see is Diomedes. So that's the last stop on this little army tour that we have going on. And he goes to see Diomedes and his second in command, who is this guy called Sthenelus. It's that STH sound, Sthenelus, even though I gather when I say it, it sounds like ST. And not that's the, but either way, it's Sthenelus. So he goes to see both of them, and he goes up to Diomedes. Agamemnon goes up to Diomedes, and he starts telling him about how great his father is. Diomedes has this incredible dad who was this incredible hero. Like, everybody knows who Tydeus' dad is. And so Agamemnon starts telling him like how amazing his dad is. He's just like, I've heard all these stories about your dad. He was this great hero. Like, Tydeus is this, Tydeus is that. It's a shame he had a son like you. And you're like, what? Like, oh my God, this man, Diomedes is a scary man. Like, we're not talking about like, you know, little Timmy in the corner here. Like, no, this is a man who will kill you. And yet Diomedes just stares at him. Diomedes doesn't even bat an eye. And it's Sthenelus who actually stands up and he's like, hold on, mate. Like, actually, yes, Tydeus was really great, but Diomedes is just as great as his father, maybe even better. Says all the stuff, basically. He like goes across all these stories and all that sort of stuff about how great Diomedes is. And Diomedes then just holds up his hand at one point and he's like, look, don't waste your breath. I appreciate what you're doing, Sthenelus, but stop. Because he's just trying to make us mad so that we perform better in battle. And he's only trying to make us do that because actually how we perform in battle doesn't reflect on us. It reflects on him. And obviously, you know, I was reading this because I'm a huge fan of Diomedes, and I'm reading this just like, there's my man. Oh yes, he's being so rational. Literally obsessed with him. And so Agamemnon then just walks away, and everybody gets ready for battle, and that's it. The action now cuts to the Trojans too, because bear in mind, they're also getting ready for battle. But Homer highlights that all they're doing is, you know how I constantly like mimic the Greeks when they're always like, yeah. Well, the Trojans are doing that this time. It's the Trojans where they cut to them and they're just like, yeah, battle. And Homer notes that the reason is because none of them speak the same language, which is funny because I never thought about that until he wrote that down, that he was like, that's how they communicate, that they just have to yell. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, Homer, I see you. And the person at the center of the screaming, the person who's really stirring them on, is Ares. So Ares has now come down onto the Trojan side and he is going to fight for them. So whilst he's spurring them on, Athena is now spurring on the Greeks. And with the godly interventions, with the godly help, they both stride into battle. And this, unlike in book 3, we're actually going to get some battle scenes. For the duration of this series, I'm not really going to be going into a lot of detail on the battle scenes, but for this book I will, just so that you guys can see what's in store when you read it. So we are going to be describing a couple of gory scenes. I'm just gonna say it straight up. That's why there's a warning at the beginning of this video, because this shit It's dark. But we're just gonna be doing it for this book. For any other book, if you want to see, they're all like this. Anytime I say there's lots of killing, it's because they describe it like this, but I'll be here all day if I go through each and every one. But let's just do some of the battle scenes. So the first Greek on the battlefield to kill a Trojan is a guy called Antilochus. Now Antilochus has his spear and he shoots it straight for this dude. The spear goes through the guy's helmet, literally to the back of his head, and he falls to the ground. Now, as he falls to the ground, this other Greek called Elpenor, he sort of drives in to come and pick up the armor and the body. Now, this is important because I said this in book 3 as well, that the armor is very important. So not only the armor, the bodies, the chariots, the horses, you know, anything that you can get from the other side as booty, as a war prize, that's utterly important. So this struggle for bodies and the struggle for armor happens throughout the duration of this text. So Elpenor comes in to pick up the body, but also to pick up the armor that he's wearing, because to go back to Greece and to be like, hey, I killed this hero, here's his breastplate, that's much more important than to just say some random story and to not have anything to prove it. Remember, they didn't have Instagram, okay? So that was how they were going to prove it. So Elpenor comes down, picking up the armor, and as he's doing that, he gets stabbed in the ribcage, right? So another spear comes out of nowhere, stabs him in the ribcage, and he falls down, he's dead. And that's because this guy Agenor had seen him do that and was like, not on my watch, which means that Agenor can then go in and pick up the body and pick up the armor and go back to the Trojan camp, right? So that's one battle sequence. At the same time that this is happening, we then cut to Ajax. So big Ajax is now on a different part of the battlefield, and he's getting into his own little issues, problems, whatever. Not really problems, to be fair, because he's like the man in this scene. So he then goes in and he has his spear and he shoots it at this other guy who has a really long name, and I'm not going to highlight it because he dies. And he dies brutally because Ajax stabs him in the chest with a spear and it goes clean out the other side. So this man is like, there's no chance he's living. Now, when he falls to the ground, one of Priam's sons called Antiphus sees this and he's like, oh no, you just killed a Trojan, I need to avenge that man's death. So he wants to kill Ajax. So he fires his spear at big Ajax, who's just standing in the open at this point. But he's not very good, clearly, because it misses. It doesn't hit Ajax. There's no godly divine intervention in regards to this spear missing Ajax. And instead it hits this guy called Lucus. Yes, Lucus was present during the Trojan War. This is how you spell his name. I actually don't know how you would say that in a Greek accent, but I have always read it Lucas as Lucas, not at Lucas, but either way. So he ends up getting stabbed instead of Ajax. Now Lucus is actually one of Odysseus's men. Now Odysseus is close by and he sees Lucus be struck with the spear and he's like, what the man? So Odysseus then walks out into the more so battle plain from where he is, and in fact he's so intimidating that it said that the Trojans almost like span out to give him the space to walk into. He walks into the space, he fires his spear at a different guy called Democune, and it hits Democune in the side of his temple, like literally in the side of his head on his temple, and comes clean out the other side of his head. It's brutal, and Homer tells you all of this too, so as you're reading it's like you're just slowly sort of sinking, and like every time I read it I'm always like, oh, but I can't stop. There's lots of other descriptions like this even throughout the text, but in this moment the Trojans then start to not like retreat, I don't want to use that word because Homer doesn't use that word, but they basically are just like, let's just go back to the camps and like reconvene, which obviously does not make Apollo happy because Apollo is a god who's on their side. Apollo sees this and he's like, the what are you all doing? The Greeks, they don't have this crazy armor. They're not like made of stone. They're not magical. Stay and fight. This is what you're here for. It's a battle, which is a terrible way of spurring on an army. And I think he's probably more annoyed because Homer tells us that Athena's actually doing a much better job at spurring on the Greeks rather than Apollo right now, who's just yelling at the Trojans. Now there's a teeny tiny little battle scene that's described right after this, right before the end of the book. We are wrapping up now, but I might as well just tell you since we're here. So there's a fight between a Greek and a Thracian. I'm not going to mention their names because they all die, so it's like not important. But the Thracian ends up throwing a rock at the Greek. Now this is important because rocks, this is the first time they're introduced in the battle, and they do continue. So rocks are now a weapon. So we've got swords that have been mentioned, we've got spears that have been mentioned, and now rocks. This is now a whole new level of war. So basically the Thracian throws this rock at the Greek and it hits him and like all of his tendons sever, like literally Homer tells us that. So he's on the ground, he's like, I'm in pain, as you would expect if you got hit by like a massive rock, not like a pebble, right? Like we're talking huge ass rocks. So he has it thrown, he's on the ground, then the Thracian rolls over, runs, obviously doesn't roll over, that would be really weird. So he comes over, stabs the Greek guy with his spear, like, and we're told that it's like right next to his belly button, so like all of his guts like pop out and they're like oozing everywhere. Like Homer tells us that detail because like we really have to know that. And so all of the guts are everywhere and whatever. And so as the Thracian is about to like turn around and start running away, because bear in mind, in the middle of battle, this is like not a good idea, that a Greek guy sees this happening and another Greek guy shoots him with a spear in his lung. So it hits him in the back as he's running away. And that guy falls over. So the Greek has to go and get his spear out of the Thracian guy. And as he goes to pick up the spear, he then turns around and like the rest of the Thracian army have surrounded him. And so he dies too. It's just like, we get all of these little details of these little battles that truly add to the whole like war element of the book. It's so good. Like literally every single time I read any of these minor battle scenes, and we get all their names, by the way, and a lot of times we get their parentage as well. So it's like, you hear of this guy and he's like running around, he's like gonna die, and you're like, oh no. And then you hear how great his dad was and how great his grandfather was and how his children will never see him again. And you're like, I didn't know him long enough to give a shit. But thanks, Homer. But that's where the book ends, okay? The book literally ends with Homer noting that there were like loads and loads of deaths on the battlefield, loads more than he could count on both sides. So we know that it was just a complete bloodbath in book 4. But yeah, that's it. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm really sorry if you could tell that my energy was a little bit down today, and that is because I have not had a coffee. It's a whole thing. I haven't had access to a coffee just yet. We'll get there in the end, but I needed to film this because this episode comes out tomorrow when I'm filming it, so thrilling. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you guys did enjoy this, then please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon. Once again, do like this video as well because it helps with my engagement, and we love to know that nerds are getting paid somewhere because this is my job. So thank you guys so much again, and we'll be seeing you next time with more Iliad content here on MoAn. We'll see you then.